Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of series 2 of Planet and the People, suppose episode 10. This is the podcast all about climate change. I've just seen a whole load of deer on the bottom of the field, and the dog hasn't noticed them yet, and they've all gone completely still as I approach them. I think they're babies, actually. Oh yeah, she's seen them. And they're running. Anyway, they've gone. So last week I spoke to Professor Mark Maslin and Professor Chris Rapley, and we hashed out the whole big global issue of international politics and how politicians and businesses and the big guys basically deal with climate change. Now I'm paring things right back down, and we're talking about individuals and how our individual choices can help. There are a huge amounts of rules and opinions about how we can be environmentally friendly. You got to be vegan, you got to stop flying, you got to stop buying clothes, you've got to stop travelling at all, you've got to stop having kids, you've got to stop having fun. And it can also feel, well, what difference can little old me make? How can my choices actually have a wider impact? Well, that is basically what I was talking about with my guest for this week, Georgina Wilson Powell. Georgina is the author of the new book, Is It Really Green? She is also the founder and editor of online eco and lifestyle magazine, Pebble. I could waffle on a fair bit about Georgina, but I may as well pass you back to a cold February morning where I was sat with the dogs having a fantastic conversation on Zoom with Georgina Wilson Powell.
Yeah, I put my dog in the other room because she tends to make noises.
I'm hoping that these two... Oh, did you just hear that? Generally, they're okay. I think they'll be okay, but... Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Georgina Wilson Powell, for talking to me. You are the founder and editor of online eco magazine, Pebble. I say eco because you don't like the word sustainable, do you?
No, I don't, but I do use it more than I wish I did.
What don't you like about it?
It's not really the right word. We actually have a real shortage of vocabulary around sort of eco-friendly and sustainable and green options. And to me, sustainable just sounded really boring. And I don't think it kind of conjures up like the innovation and the ambition and the excitement that a lot of sustainable companies are working in and what they're sort of doing. So yeah, we really need to find some new language, I think, to move us forward.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. You are also author of this wonderful book that I'm holding out. Yeah, I've read it back to back, cover to cover, and I found it fascinating. This is It Really Green? Everyday Eco Dilemmas Answered. And I really liked it. I mean, I thought reading it back to back, I don't know sort of how you intended it to be read, because I think it was brilliant to read it back to back and to find out all of these things and to learn so much about lifestyle. And it's got me thinking in my subconscious sometimes about how I live, what I do, what I use, but also as a book to just have in the house for every time a question pops into your head of, I wonder if that aspect of my lifestyle is green and sustainable. I wonder what the impact is. Well, have a look in this book and you'll probably find the answer.
That's yeah, I mean, I intended it both ways. So it was written as, a journey through the rooms in your house, so you can kind of follow that and think about how your life measures up in terms of what you're doing at the moment and areas you can improve and maybe areas you've gone further than the book. But also it's, the best thing I can think of is for someone to have it in their kitchen or in their living room or something and go back and refer to it when they are making decisions or aren't sure about something, so that it's got sort of, more of a longer lifespan, and that it's helpful for people at different points of their day or their life or their decision-making process. So yeah, that's brilliant that you see it both ways. You can dip into it, you can start at any point, or you can read it cover to cover.
I mean, it literally covered so much stuff. It covered things like air travel, pets, cars, and then you went down the route of periods and sex, which I thought was great, because I was thinking about, I wonder about that, and there it was.
That was really fun to read out in the audiobook.
Yeah. Oh, you've got an audiobook as well?
Yeah, there's an audio version with me reading it, and we did it all in 2 days in between the various lockdowns. And the poor engineer, producer that was in with me for 2 days. By the end of the 2 days, he was like, right, I can't do anything. And we've talked about sex, and we've talked about funerals.
Yeah. What's that on? Is that on Audible and all those sorts of channels?
Yeah, it's everywhere that you'd normally buy or stream audiobooks. So definitely Audible, and then anywhere else.
It's funny, I want to talk about a little bit what the sound engineer said about I can't do anything, but we'll come to that. First of all, just tell me a little bit about yourself, and your background and your journey towards being the author of this book, and also being the founder and editor of Pebble.
So Pebble came first. I have always been a magazine editor. I started off in the music industry, and I ran a music magazine in my early 20s. And then I moved out to Dubai, and I ran various food and travel magazines, and ended up looking after a whole sort of swathe of different titles, and travelling all over the world, reviewing amazing 5-star hotels, and having, on the face of it, very jet set kind of lifestyle, which, on the one hand I loved, and on the other hand, as I got more into it, I just felt it more and more empty, and I had this big, what is my purpose? What is the point of all this? I've reached a certain level in my career, but really, what does it matter? Kind of feeling, which I think a lot of people are going through or have gone through recently.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was sort of, about 8 years ago now. And I came back to London, and I worked for a big supermarket for a year, looking after all of their content.
When you say content, do you mean sort of publicity, that sort of thing?
No, so they had an in-store supermarket magazine, and then they had an iPad magazine, and then they had all their sort of various comms and things. So I looked after all of that, and that sort of showed me the opposite end. We were dealing with stuff that was a very sort of low-cost, mass market kind of way. And for me, we were just missing so many conversations, and I could see there was this sort of bubbling up of interest all over the place, the rise in organic food, the rise in ethical fashion, the sort of interest in moving away from plastics, the kind of crazy innovation that you were getting in all the tech magazines. And for me, no one was really talking about it with a sort of stylish angle and for an everyday angle. So for your kind of, your normal person who doesn't really want to see the planet on fire, but doesn't really know what to do about it. So really that's how Pebble came about. It came about as a sort of positive storytelling platform that looks like a stylish magazine, and that really, we talk about everything from eco-travel right through to sort of soil health to permaculture, various ways of ethical fashion and things like that. So it's a sort of weekend supplement style lifestyle magazine-y thing that is just exploded, to be honest, and taken over my life.
I can imagine. And it's not just the written word, because you have festivals as part of it as well, don't you? You have Pebble Fest and also Future Fest.
Yeah, so in 2019 we added events onto what we do. So we were having 1,000-person and all-day events in London with marketplaces and talks and workshops all around this idea of everyday activism, which is kind of key to Pebble and key to the book. And obviously we've had to sort of pivot away from that for the moment. So we did a sort of 2-day big virtual festival called Future Fest at the end of last year, and that was all trying to imagine what the future would actually look like if we are carbon neutral or net zero or whatever you want to call it, because there's not enough focus on what that looks like. There's lots of focus on what we need to move away from, but not to what we move to or what that looks like. So there's a lot of people who are far cleverer than me talking about sort of, if we can't imagine the future, how are we ever going to get there? How are we going to visualize what this utopia of net zero looks like?
Yeah.
But yeah, so Pebble's been going for about 4 years, and we've got a big community. We've got a big Facebook group. We're just about to open up a paid community where you'll get much more content from us on a monthly basis. So you'll get checklists and action points and a book club, and as I said, the monthly virtual events. So that's going to start in April. And yeah, and the book came out in January, so
yeah,
it's been busy.
I can imagine. So I want to talk about the book, and I want to go through a few bits and pieces. But I wanted to also just touch on what you'd said previously. The idea of sort of joy and where everyone gets joy, and obviously there are some people who just love organic gardening, but there are lots and lots of things. If you're feeling passionate about sports, you're feeling passionate about fashion, traveling, going off on adventures, having kids, going to the pub, all of those things.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can feel that if you really want to live a sustainable lifestyle, you have to sacrifice all those joys in life. Especially if you're speaking to someone who gets all of their joys out of all of those things and not out of the primary thing of the organic gardening and the making things
I think
from
that's
scratch.
all of us right now. All of us are, gagging to go to the pub and have fun and all of those things. And this book and what we sort of talk about is not a case of having to give everything up and just wear a hemp shirt on top of a mountain and not do anything. That's not what this is about. It's about actually looking at everything you do love and everything that you are doing every day and just tweaking it a bit and kind of going, okay, well, instead of using a disposable razor, can I use a safety razor? Can I use an electric razor? If I'm going running, can the sportswear that I wear be made from natural fibres rather than fibres full of plastic? Are the trainers that I'm going to wear from a brand that actually cares about where the shoes are going to go after I've finished with them? So yes, it can feel overwhelming, but also I see it as a really strong opportunity for every decision you're making to just be slightly different. We're not saying don't buy, not saying don't travel, but how can you just sort of slightly tweak it to make it better for the planet? Because what the book tries to show you, as well as the sort of individual action points, at scale we all have a massive impact. There's 7.8 billion of us on the planet. If we all decide to do something slightly different, it does change the scope of things. Look at how we got rid of plastic straws a couple of years ago. We were so close to kind of changing the culture around takeaway coffee cups. And they're small things, but when we all do them, industries change, culture changes. So you shouldn't underestimate the power that you have when you are changing little things at home. But it's also not a case of you have to do everything right this minute.
Yes.
The book isn't about you throwing out everything you've ever bought and starting again. I'd hate for people to do that.
That would go against it slightly.
Yeah, you want to keep whatever you've bought, keep it in circulation, keep wearing it, keep using it. But it's when you do come to purchase whatever that thing is, whether it's your next takeaway lunch or whether it's a car, what can you do to make it a bit more eco-friendly? Because all these little actions add up. And they don't just add up in the carbon impact, but they really add up in the culture. It's not just, the physical impact of products. It's how we all think about these things and what they mean to us in our lives.
I was going to actually say, because that follows on a little bit quite nicely, what you say quite a lot in the book, and what I've heard as well. I did an interview with Chiara Vitali from Greenpeace in the last series of the podcast, and she said about sort of the more excessive consumerism. And one thing that you point out several times in the book is how our habits have ballooned so much in the last 50 years. So our consumption of meat was something that Chiara from Greenpeace was talking about, but our consumption of fashion, of everything, has doubled per person. We all need so much more of everything. And would you say that consumerism itself, the act of consuming something, is not so much of a problem as the excessive consumerism, needing 50,000 pairs of shoes? I'm not sure how many people actually have that many, but yeah.
More than you probably think. Yes, definitely. I mean, we are in a capitalist society. We are consumers. We're not going to change that at this point in time. But what I think we can do is use that consumerism more wisely. We can really care about where the money that we've all worked really hard for, where that money goes and what that money does. So it's not a case of, stopping people buying shoes, but choosing the brand that is going to make the most of that money that you give them and act responsibly. But alongside that, yes, we do buy too much in some areas. We've become obsessed by quantity rather than quality, and a lot of that is driven by price. It's driven by convenience. Those have become the two things that really determine what we buy, instead of quality or how long an item lasts or its durability. it's a case of like, well, I'll have it in every colour because it's so cheap, why wouldn't I? And when you sort of take a step back and go, okay, but that means the people that are making those things earn pennies, that's the bit that we've lost. We've lost that connection to the people that are making it and the way things are made. I mean, the fact that pretty much all of our clothes are still made by hand, it's just those people aren't in your vision. There is a sort of disconnect, I think, between what we buy and where it comes from, which we need to kind of reestablish. And also that mindset around where we find value and what makes us feel good, because we all love the kind of the online shop and then the package comes a couple of days later and it's exciting, or we find self-worth in things that we buy and wear, and that's kind of fueled this kind of more mentality. And I think that is something we need to unravel and kind of work on.
It is so easy now, more than it ever has been. Someone was giving me a recommendation for a book the other day, and I just was sitting down and I was like, right, I bought it. It's going to arrive tomorrow. Then it arrived, and it was the front cover was really questionable. But it's so, and I fell victim exactly to that sort of fact of like, yeah, just go for it. And now I haven't read that book.
It's never been as easy to be an overconsumer. It's not set up for us to be sustainable consumers, so it's not all of our fault. That's not where we're sort of laying the blame, or definitely I'm not. But we need to think more. We need to think more deeply about what we're doing and where we're purchasing, and trying to kind of rein that kind of like buy now kind of impulse in a bit.
So over to things to do with the book. So I thought I'd throw a bit of a quick fire round of some pointers. Firstly, this isn't so quick fire, but the topic of recycling, this isn't really about the book, but to your knowledge, how much is recycled that we put in our recycling bin?
It's a really complicated question that I wish I had a really simple answer for, because in the UK we don't have a national recycling policy. So I can't tell you where you are, what your recycling policy is, or what gets put in your bin, or where it goes. In the same way, I actually don't really know in Kent where it goes. I don't think it goes very far, to be honest. So that is part of the problem, and it means that no one has an overview. And so without the overview, we can't see on a national point of scale, like what's being burnt, what's being sent to dubious places abroad, what's not being dealt with. It's all very patchy.
So there's no central policy about recycling in this country?
It's down to your local council and local boroughs.
That's something that needs to be rectified.
I mean, there's a kind of... we were signed up to like an EU policy that means 50% of household waste should be recycled, but we're about 42 or 43% in England. Wales and Scotland were higher last time I saw the statistics, but no one's it's not the same policy throughout England or Wales or Scotland for that matter, or Northern Ireland. All of those will be broken down to that devolved level, and then they'll be broken down by council and borough and everything else. So it's really frustrating because, there's people 5 miles away from me that can recycle their food waste. We can't do that here. It's really hard then to give people advice on like what you should be doing from a recycling point of view. And recycling, weirdly, or not weirdly, is the issue that every single person brings up in workshops that I do, in talks, with the book, emails to Pebble. There is a desire, a national desire to be better. That's.
I mean, there's a petition for someone to start. Create some really simple. I mean, here where I'm here, you have to take your bottles into town and put them in the bottle bank. Whereas in London, you just put those bottles in the recycling bin. So if you sort of come out for a weekend or whatever, you wouldn't know the difference. And yeah, it's bonkers.
It's really complex, and often the energy used to recycle something isn't far off the energy used to create it in the first place. So recycling is kind of like your last line of defense, rather than your kind of like, it's fine, I can buy everything because I recycle it.
Okay, so that the whole quick fire thing of certain things, the whole quick fire things of certain things in the book. Just describe food provenance for me and how you would advise people to research their food provenance.
So food provenance really just means where your food has come from. So behind the supermarkets, going deeper from that, like where has it come from? Has it come from the UK? Has it come from, we're talking about blueberries from Kenya or strawberries from somewhere else? And thinking about the air miles and the energy used and the growing conditions and everything else that's gone into those products to make sure that you have those products all year round. So there's a real debate around whether we should all be eating locally to reduce those air miles, or whether we should be eating seasonally, whether we should be eating organic, whether it should all be plant-based, because each of those have pros and cons, and sometimes they align and sometimes they don't. So, really to try and eat as eco-friendly as possible, you kind of want a mix of all of those depending on where you live. Obviously, if you live in Nevada, you're going to have a different food map around you than if you live in Kent. So it's about working out what you can eat that is near to you, that is seasonal to you, that the farms and the producers and the growers are acting as sustainably as possible, that there's good animal welfare if you're eating animal products, that you're also not contributing to other problems. We talk a lot about in the book like almonds and avocados and how they are obviously superfoods in the vegan movement, but they have massive environmental issues with the growth of them. So yeah, it's doing a bit of research and just thinking sensibly about what you're eating.
Are there, I was going to ask later on, but are there certain certifications that you can see on food packets in the shop that can say, okay, this is British sourced, this is locally sourced, this is ethically sourced, this is welfare, all of that?
So there isn't one certification that does all of that.
No.
Of course. So you have like the red tractor logo on meat for British.
Yes, but that means it's been raised in Britain, and that's including vegetables, meat, everything.
Yeah, so red tractor I think is just on meat. You have the Soil Association logo, which means that something's been grown organically, which is pretty much our biggest in the UK, or our biggest organic certification. You have fair trade, which means it's like cotton and bananas and chocolate and coffee have been grown to this fair trade level of ethics, which makes sure that producers are earning more than their minimum wage. The trouble is it's a hodgepodge of all of them. And then you've got really excitingly things like apps coming through which can tell you when you scan a barcode if there's no palm oil in products.
Oh, really?
So there's an app called Giki, Giki, which you can download, and you can just scan anything in a supermarket. It will tell you if there's palm oil in it.
Is that just for palm oil, or is
just
it
for palm oil at the minute? Because as I think I mentioned in the book, like palm oil can actually be listed under quite a few different names. So if you're trying to avoid it, it's sometimes harder than just looking for the words palm oil. And also there's more sort of forward-thinking brands are starting to use blockchain as well, so that they can track the provenance of the food, so you can actually sort of look back through it and go, oh, it came from that cow in that field at that date. So blockchain is the technology that everybody's using, and there is an app called Happily, I think. I don't know if it's still around, but it's Happy, but ILY at the end instead.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know about these apps. That's quite exciting. That's quite sort of innovative. It's a little bit like Vivino, which is a wine app, but more green. So, I wanted to ask about the dishwasher. That's something you mentioned, which surprised me and a lot of people in the
Everyone
book.
loves the dishwasher question.
I know.
Yeah, apparently I've been solving people's lockdown arguments with their other halves with the dishwasher question.
Yeah, certainly.
So the question is, is a dishwasher more eco-friendly than washing up by hand? And I think a lot of people want the washing up by hand to be the less the most sustainable option. But actually, when you look at water usage, the dishwasher is much more efficient, and actually it offsets a lot of the energy that is being used because it is so efficient with water and the amount of stuff you can kind of get clean in one go. So the tap puts out, I think, about 9 litres of water a minute. And if you think, you're washing up, you're running the tap, you're probably going through a couple of loads, you might be rinsing dishes. Whereas a dishwasher on an eco setting will get through about 25 litres for everything. So it is the dishwasher. But it does come with a couple of caveats. It's got to be full. It's got to be on an eco setting. You can make it greener by using a plant-based cleaning brand that doesn't come in plastic. Yeah. So dishwasher's pretty good.
that's a great. Usually, convenience is not more environmentally friendly, so that's a good answer. You mentioned avocados before, so this was something I read in the book that made me rather crestfallen. Christ, I need to sort of cut those back.
I know. I feel like I am at this point taking things away from you, but it's not. It's not a case of not eating any avocados ever. It's a case. It's again. It's the problem at scale. You know, the avocados have had such a huge trend, whatever you want to call it, that no one's really thought about how those huge number that we're eating are then grown, and they can only grow in certain places in the world. They're a very thirsty crop, so it takes 320 litres of water to grow one avocado. You know, they're famously temperamental. You've got to keep them at the right temperature, the transportation. People in like rainy London were not really meant to eat avocados every day of the week.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, it's a product of globalization, which is so great for so many things, but we have to look at what that impact is on the area that is growing them. And unfortunately, it's deforestation as a byproduct. A lot of these farmers don't have that much money. The money isn't trickling down to them, so they are clearing forested land to make way for more avocado trees and farms. So
can you not grow avocados in greenhouses in the UK?
I think you probably could, but I don't think it's a thing you could do at scale. And scale is often the problem. You know, if a small number of people are doing this thing, it's fine. But if it's suddenly billions of people, that's where we get a problem. So I guess it's a realization that, you know, being local and being different and being seasonal and having stuff that connects to where we each live, rather than all of the world eating one thing, is probably the way forward.
Yeah. Also, clothes and fashion. Fashion is something that in the last 2 years people have really started talking about, or maybe even less than that, last year, about the fact that fast fashion is bad for the environment. And I've got a whole episode dedicated to that very topic. But talk to me a little bit about why fashion is bad for the environment.
There are so many ways. We've been talking about this for years. It depends on how you want to look at it. I mean, you can look at it from the overconsumption point of view. And at the minute we make each year about 140 billion bits of pieces of clothing. So that's about 11 per person for every single person on the planet each year. I live in a very privileged Western society. I don't think I'd buy 11 pieces of clothing a year. So we produce too much of it. What we're making is mostly made of plastic and cheap materials and toxic dyes. So there's plastic in about 60% of our clothing at this point. Those clothes don't last, so we throw them away. Even the kind of secondhand market and the charity shops and everything, they don't want the cheap clothes that you get from the high street stores. So they go up in landfill, and in landfill they don't biodegrade. So they just sit there. So we're kind of literally sitting on a mountain of t-shirts. A lot of the brands overproduce their clothes. You know, they heavily discount and then they burn or bury what's left. The factories where the clothes are made, unfortunately, are contributing to desertification and, you know, huge environmental problems because they're draining rivers and lakes to use the water to grow the crops. You know, we forget that most of our clothes are grown, most of them.
Yeah.
You know, they come from cotton, they come from bamboo, they come from linen, or they're made of plastic, which comes from oil. So your clothes have an impact in so many different ways before they get to the shop and get to you. And fast fashion's become this thing that it's okay for it to be disposable. And clothes were never meant to be disposable. We're meant to treasure them. There's meant to be artistry and, you know, craftsmanship in our clothes that we treasure. Because they're made of valuable materials. So we really need to kind of move back towards that end of the scale. And obviously now clothes have become so cheap for so long, we're so used to them only costing, you know, a small amount of money when actually they should be costing a lot more. It's a big mindset shift, and also it feels sustainable and ethical fashion can feel very much like a sort of privilege and something that isn't accessible to all. Which is a big problem because we need everybody at every budgetary level contributing and getting involved. So there's so much work to be done, and that doesn't, you know, what I've just kind of listed off really quickly doesn't even cover the kind of human rights element, which is something like the Fashion Revolution guys work on really, really well. Yeah, it's a fashion. It can be overwhelming But there are so many ways that you can combat it, which is where I think is the fun bit and the innovative bit. So from supporting brands that are making biodegradable shoes, to wearing, buying handbags made of pineapple fibres, to swapping clothes, to doing the vintage secondhand Depop thing. It's a very easy way to make changes, and you don't all have to do it in the same way. There's so many opportunities and so many alternatives out there. It's just a case of like knowing they exist and being a bit brave sometimes to try out new things.
You talk about clothes banks a little bit in the book, and I've never sort of come across those, but someone I spoke to told me that she was trying to take all of her old kiddie clothes to a clothes bank, and they wouldn't accept them because they were sort of soiled or torn. And I thought clothes banks is the place where you do send those unwearable clothes to, because they'll do some magic with them. Where are clothes banks, and what are they, and what are the rules?
So I don't know where your friend took the clothes, because most clothes banks are just a bank and you put the clothes in.
Yes.
No one,
There's
no one judging you.
Like a bottle bank.
Yeah, like a bottle bank. No one judging you at the entry point. But what's quite interesting, and we've done some features on this with Pebble, is like what happens to those clothes after that point. So if they are wearable, they will get cleaned and they will be packaged off to different charity shops, or they'll get sold into a sort of secondhand marketplace. Often they end up in third world countries, which actually is now becoming a bit of a problem because they're now swamped with crappy t-shirts from H&M, to be honest. If they are unwearable, then they get shredded and they're used for things like car seat filling. So they get used in stuff that is just like a mixture of textile waste. So it's difficult, but obviously once they are no longer used for anything, they get put in landfill. And if they are, have plastic in them, if they're synthetic, if they are even recycled plastic, that plastic breaks down into microplastics, and then we get into that kind of whole world of problems. So it's really trying to keep those clothes in circulation as long as we can. If we keep clothes in circulation around 9 months more than perhaps we first thought, then it's about 30% reduction in carbon in terms of their manufacturing. So mending, making, sharing, bartering, swapping, swishing, whatever you want to do with it, just keeping it in circulation is the thing to do.
Okay. And with zero waste stores as well, you mentioned quite a few times. And are those just general food shops, or are those just general shops? Do they have a badge of honour saying we don't waste anything?
So generally what we mean by a zero waste shop is a shop that will not really have any products and packaging. So everything will be in the jars or the bins or the drop down. What are they called? I'm just going to go bins.
Those cylinder, those funky little things that usually have sweets in sweet shops traditionally, but now they have nuts.
Now they have everything, and you can get your cleaning products from there. You can get your toiletries from there. So they might sell also local eggs and bread and local cheese, or anything that is made locally and can come without plastic or packaging. And they've also become really strong community hubs, especially over the last year, because a lot of those zero waste shops, A, have stayed open, and B, had food when the big supermarkets didn't at the beginning of lockdown, because they're invested in these local food systems, and the food isn't getting snarled up in big global supply chains. So they've become a really important part of many towns and cities. And I think we started a list with about 13 a few years ago, and now there's maybe 300 in the UK. So they have really, really exploded. And I just love them. I have one at the end of my street, and I go there and I fill up my cleaning bottles and I fill up my shampoo bottle. And what I like as well is you just measure out what you need. So you don't buy stuff that you don't need and it's going to sit in a cupboard for 2 years. Again, it's a really easy way just to tweak what you're buying and where you're buying it from.
Yeah. So a few other pointers from the book. Christmas trees.
Christmas trees.
Christmas trees. People always seem to think how environmentally unfriendly they are, and what's your thoughts on Christmas trees? I know your thoughts on Christmas trees.
So it's real Christmas trees is really the way to go. So Christmas trees are actually a great way to lock in carbon. They have to be grown for sort of around 7 years before they're cut down, and during those 7 years they're acting as a carbon sink, which all of our trees do. Most of them that we use here in the UK are British grown, so you can often find ones that are local to you, or that you can then return in a pot. That's become a much bigger thing in the last couple of years. And also it's not using an artificial tree, which while it is reusable, people think so, oh, it's brilliant. But the trees that, artificial trees, are basically made of petroleum byproducts. So they're oil-based or they're plastic-based, and they don't biodegrade. So pretty much every Christmas tree that has ever been made artificially is still here with us somewhere.
Every single one?
Every single one.
Yes, wow.
Quite a lot in attics, obviously, but, when you do get rid of them, they don't go anywhere. And they take an awful lot of energy and resources to make. So they have a really big carbon impact over and above, people are like, they don't want to cut down a tree, but it's actually the best thing to do.
Well, good. Christmas trees are good. Real Christmas trees are good.
Real Christmas trees are good.
Emails and iCloud storage.
Ooh.
This was an interesting revelation.
Yes. We don't really think about data as having an impact in terms of carbon, but it has a massive carbon impact. And I think in the book by 2025, our sort of data centres all around the world will have the same carbon impact as one of like the top 5 countries in the world. So they need to be seen as playing at that level. And when we're talking about data centres, we're literally talking about those massive warehouse facilities packed full of servers which are being run at certain temperatures because they've got to be kept cool. They're hugely energy inefficient, I should say, or power sort of hungry. So there's that element to it. And then also every time you send an email, it has a carbon impact. So only a small one. So I think if you're just sending words with no attachment, it's about 5 grams. And with an attachment, it's about 50 grams. But we all send hundreds and thousands, millions of emails a year. So when you think of think of that as scale, it's having a rapidly increasing effect on our environment, which is quite hard to get your head around. I know it is for me when I just assume the cloud is literally a cloud above my head. But it is affecting the clouds above our head. So it's, again, just thinking, can you send less emails? Can you not reply, have that reply tennis back and forth where you're just sending okay and cheers and thanks kind of stuff, and how you can reduce that energy usage. And there are a lot of companies that are working, who are very big in this sort of carbon energy data space, that are really trying to figure out how, as our sort of internet needs expand, how we manage that carbon impact.
It's the emissions from data storage units around the world are something quite similar to the emissions caused by air travel. I think it's something like 3 or 4%.
It's pretty big. I think it's scheduled to grow to about 5% if we don't change. And when you think how much more we're all doing online, especially in the last couple of years, the Netflix streaming, the podcasts, everything else. We live online a lot more, and that's only going to increase. So it is going to become a bigger problem.
There are so many things I could sort of pop up and bring up about the book moments. I mean, one of the things, batteries, how to recycle, that was a question I was thinking to myself. I use quite a lot of batteries, and then, hey, I've got the answer, how to solve my battery intake. I won't ask you because I'll say read the book. Blanket veganism versus conscientious meat consumption. I made the conscientious meat consumption up. I'm sure people have used that phrase. I suppose versus sort of blanket veganism versus like, okay, I'm going to eat a little bit of meat, but I'm going to eat meat that is sourced in a certain way that I know is within planetary boundaries, if I can do that. What are your thoughts on that?
Personally, that's where I sit. I would rather choose things that come from me locally and seasonally and organically if possible, and I know where they've come from, and I would include meat in that. But not sort of every day, and not kind of like excessive, as a treat and as a sort of balanced diet. But we eat more plant-based than we did a few years ago, and we probably will continue to do that, because I do feel uncomfortable sometimes about just because there's a vegan version of something, is it automatically better for the planet? Because a lot of them, are pre-packaged or, come with ingredients where you're not sure where they're from. There's also a lot of issues around soy. I'm not saying that that's not a valid choice for lots of people. It is, and I think it comes down to your personal preference. Like we say on Pebble, like everyone has different red lines. Everyone's going to value different things in a slightly different order. So I think it depends on your situation, your budgets, where you are, your personal values, all of those things. But the most important thing is to think about where that food's coming from.
On the subject of conscientious meat consumption, on the conscientious food, conscientious consumption of everything, really, there could be the argument that it is much easier to live a very green, sustainable life if you have money and time. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it is totally right. You can't get away from it. Money and time do help most issues, not just being environmentally friendly. Although the 1% have a massively damaging environmental footprint.
Did you say the 1%? Oh, yeah, the 1%.
As in, like the
richest.
The 1% richest. I think this is where we need more conversations and we need more people involved in sustainable discussions. It can't just be middle class white people banging on about organic vegetables. It needs to be everybody from every point of view and from every background thinking about what makes sense for them and what's possible and what needs to change for lifestyles to change and culture to change. So I think it's a kind of slow awakening within sustainable industries that things need to get more diverse and they need to be more accessible. It doesn't, obviously as well with scale of economies of scale, the more of us that adopt these measures, the cheaper things get. I mean, you're looking at like an organic cotton, environmentally, ethically well-produced T-shirt for sort of £25 to £30. Like 5 or 6 years ago, that was probably £60 or £70. So things are changing, but not changing far enough.
I was going to ask you a question, which I think you sort of already answered, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The question of that these little things can sometimes seem futile. And a lot of people feel like, for example, flying produces lots of joy, and why bother sacrificing that part of my life? Why bother sacrificing things when China is building more coal power stations and the president of Brazil is chopping down loads of forests? What are your thoughts on that? Oh, why bother?
I think I always try and flip it on its head of like, what happens if none of us bother? If none of us bother, we're literally fiddling while Rome burns. And there's no getting away from that. I mean, if you watch some of the documentaries, there is this sense of, we're all to blame and we all need to do something, but what's the point? But I think for me, there has to be a point. You have to do something. If you are bothered about the future, the planet your children are going to inherit, your nieces or nephews or whatever, or the future that you see in the next 20 or 30 years, I think we all need to start making changes. And it's not a case of, okay, no one having any fun and everyone giving up everything. I think it's about finding your own way through these dilemmas. Not everyone is going to have the same dilemma. Like, we don't have children. That sometimes makes me kind of put a big tick next to it, being like, oh, so eco, no children, don't know. But other people don't have cars, or they might decide that they are not going to fly for a couple of years, but, they might treat themselves to a flight for a bucket list destination in 5 years' time. It doesn't always have to be all or never. It has to be about reduction.
And everyone doing different things and bringing down their...
That's it. It's like everyone's at different levels in different parts of their life. And as long as we are reducing across the board, that is going to make the difference. And I think for me, I totally get the eco-anxiety. That's kind of why I started Pebble in the first place a few years ago, from this kind of like sheer panic and carbon guilt.
That's why I started Planet and the People.
Yeah, just like this inside kind of like, oh. So, we are engineered to do something about it. And for me, it's about using the skills you already have to play to your strengths. For me, that's communication, that's storytelling, that's connecting people. For other people, it's going to be inventing some crazy solution or, designing an app. So I think, again, we don't all have to help in the same way, and it's not a competition. It's not about looking at everyone else on your street and judging them because they're eating meat or they're driving a diesel car. You know, it's about us all working towards something that's bigger than ourselves in whatever way we can. Because that, to me, is where we find this thing that we talk about in the book called active hope, where we feel less anxious and we feel more hopeful in the act of actually doing something positive.
What sort of normal do you want us to return to, in your view? It's something I think about a lot, because I'm desperate to get out and go to the pub and see my friends and to be able to live life and have all that. A lot of the guests I've been speaking to on this podcast, especially with the second series, they rail against the obsession with getting back to normal. There are many problems with going back to normal, going back to the normal that we had before. So what do you want to see a post-COVID world looking like?
I almost want to see a kind of... I almost, in my head, I have like a short-term normal and a long-term normal. I kind of feel people need like a short-term burst of doing whatever they want for a few weeks. You know, like going to the pub, going crazy, whatever it is. Just
hedonistic
lifestyle. Yeah. Get involved in that for a couple of months, just to kind of like burn off some energy and some frustration. But I think, you know, seriously, long term, I don't want to go back to that heavily convenient driven, commutery, just so busy you can't think about the impact that anything is having, you know, that short-termism. I would love to see a sort of a post-COVID world where we make being more sustainable part of every decision. And that's not just about consuming and consumers' decisions, but in the structure of what we rebuild with, you know, in terms of their language. A lot of the change that we need to see now is structural change, whether that's politics, whether that's government, whether that's infrastructure, whatever it be. And I think making the most sustainable decision at that level is something I would want to see, and I'm not sure we're going to.
I was going to say, how hopeful do you think we will? No, you're frowning, turning your head.
Not very at the minute. I think there are countries, there are cities that are really leading the way. I don't see us doing it at the minute. I would agree with the other guests, like the more we rush to just put things back how they were, the more missed opportunities there are going to be to make something more sustainable or to make it greener. So in a way, I would have loved to have seen us planning for the future the last year, alongside dealing with what we're dealing with now. There are some weird decisions going on, you know, coal plants being given the green light.
I know. But we don't have any more coal power stations in this country. So
it's just for export.
Well, that's a bit counterintuitive, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think in a rush to get the economy started again, I think we're going to make mistakes in terms of a longer sustainable recovery, which is frustrating.
There's a petition going around, actually, for that to try and stop that coal plant happening, which I will include in the show notes, along with all of the other things, Giki and all of the other things that you've mentioned. I wanted to sort of wrap things up and finish things up a little bit by asking, of all the things in the book, how many pointers did you say there were? 257?
I think there's 242.
242. Of all of the things, what would be your big key piece of advice, of all of the things that are in there, that if someone was wanting to adapt an element of their lifestyle, what would be the key thing that you would suggest? Focus on that one, because that will have the biggest impact.
Okay. Biggest impact is debatable, because that's going to depend on your family's situation. But food waste, meal planning, working out how you can reduce the amount of food that we all throw away, because it amounts to about 500 quid a household at the minute, a year, which is insane.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to suggest things that will save you money as well, because I always think that's a win-win. You know, food waste and meal planning and batch cooking and just getting better at cooking from scratch and using what we've got, and all of those things to reduce the food that we waste, because that has a huge impact environmentally. Reducing your single-use plastic in your bathroom. We all think about kitchens and bottles and cups and cling film and that kind of stuff, but actually it's the bathroom where we have a blind eye, and people just bin, the single-use shampoo bottles and shower bottles and everything else. So trying to make that as plastic-free as you can, and there are some incredible brands out there now that either don't need packaging or come in glass or are reusable, or everything that you possibly could buy single use, you can get better reusable versions now. And number 3 is your heating and your insulation, which is something we don't talk about a lot because it's not terribly sexy. But making sure your house is well insulated, applying for the Green Homes grant, which you can now do to get £5,000 off getting your house better insulated, turning your heating down 1 degree, all those kind of things make a massive impact to the planet and also your heating bills. So those 3 combined are a really good place to start.
Okay, that's a pretty good, concise answer and something that people can start straight away.
And you don't need to leave home.
We don't need to leave home. No, you don't need to leave home. I would really, really, really recommend your book to anyone. And
Thank you.
It was also produced in a very green way as well.
It was.
The book itself is an example of how to do things sustainably.
Yeah, I'm really proud actually working with DK Books. They looked at their own internal systems on how they produce books, both within the company and the other companies that they use to make this book as green as possible, and then they've gone and changed their systems off the back of it. So that's a really simple way of showing how one thing leads to another. Every country that it's in, because it's in quite a few different countries, it's all been locally printed rather than being shipped all over the world. There's no colour in it apart from the cover, because obviously that uses more ink. The paper is recycled and FSC certified, so it's from a sustainable source. It's not in hardback because that uses more resources, so it's only paperback. What else did we do? The cover's as thin basically as we could get it to use less resources. So it's, if you're going to produce a book, and also it's the site, people don't think that there's paper wastage, but there is huge paper wastage when you print books if they're a weird size. So it's the most economical size to waste the least paper.
That's fantastic that they have now changed their practices in general after publishing your book. That is a classic example of how one person's project, one person's actions can then have a more systemic change and have a longer lasting legacy.
Absolutely. And then some people have been like, why produce a book at all? But it's an example in point that if you do one thing, it can have a more positive impact than doing nothing sometimes.
Well, thank you very much, Georgina Wilson Powell. Thank you for talking to me. Thank you for giving up your time on this rainy lockdown day.
You're very welcome. Thank you for testing my facts and my brain.
Lots of them. That was Georgina Wilson Powell. I would highly recommend her book, Is It Really Green? I found it incredibly useful, and I have found myself subconsciously thinking a lot more about the little things that I can do and the little changes that I can make. And it has also affected the way I work. I've got various projects that I am doing, and I now know how to make them more sustainable and put that at the forefront. So it is a very, very worthwhile book to have. Again, even if you just want it in your house to flick through when you have certain questions. Details of where to find it, I mean, it's on all the platforms, it's on Amazon, it's on everything else, but I put a link in the show notes. Also, I have put information in the show notes about how to find out more about Pebble, and about maybe how to subscribe to the magazine. So that's the end of episode 2. Please do click subscribe on this episode if you have enjoyed it, so that you never miss another episode. And do spread the word among your friends and family, and feel free to leave a review or a rating on whatever platform you are listening to the podcast on. Next week I will be back with an issue that is close to all of our hearts in a way. I'll be talking about pandemics and the correlation between the emergence of pandemics and environmental breakdown. Why have we been having the god-awful year that we've been having? Is it to do with our relationship with nature? Well, that'll be next week. If you can't wait until then, there's a whole backlog of other episodes that you can tune into. So, my name is Tom Ward Thomas. Planet and the People is on social media, at Planet and the People, on Facebook and Instagram, and at Planet and the P on Twitter. So do check that out if you'd like to keep up to date and find out more. And until next week, goodbye.